Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. The room felt smaller around them, like the walls couldn't stand to watch what was happening. It was a moment full of blood, betrayal and deep love. Victor held Nikki close, her body light and her breathing shallow, each breath sounding like a reminder of all she had been through. Fighting, loving, breaking and rebuilding with him. Her fingers shook as she clung to his jacket, like it was the only thing keeping her here. Victor, who had faced big losses and big wins, felt a fear he had never known before. This was a battle he couldn't win, a deal he couldn't make, an enemy he couldn't beat. Nikki's eyes searched his face, a mix of pain and peace in her look. She tried to smile for him, for them, for everything they had been through. It was Matt's revenge that had brought them to this. Not with a single explosion, but with a slow, cruel plan that pulled hope away from Nikki like a noose. Victor's voice broke as he kept whispering her name, hoping it would keep her alive, keep her heart beating, bend fate to his will like he always had. But fate didn't listen. Nikki's hand brushed his cheek, weak but full of memories of their life together. She struggled to speak, her words broken, telling him not to blame himself. She said loving him had been her strength and her pain. Victor shook his head, refusing to believe Nikki wasn't here anymore. He sobbed, begged her to stay, promised her anything, a future he would build if she would just stay. But Nikki's eyes looked past him, as if she saw something he couldn't. She whispered she was tired, that the fight was over. Victor felt a piece of himself break. Memories flooded him. Nikki walking in his office for the first time, standing by him when the world doubted her, rising again and again, choosing him even when it hurt. Now she was gone, because Matt had wanted revenge so complete, it would rip Victor's heart out and leave him to live with the pain. Victor knew Matt had won because this loss was final and never coming back. Nikki's breathing slowed, her chest rising and falling slowly. Victor held her tighter, trying to keep her here. He pleaded with her not to go, told her how much he loved her, how she was the only constant in his life. Nikki smiled, a soft, sad smile, and told him she knew that she had always known. She had loved Victor all her life. As her hand fell from his cheek, time stopped. The world held its breath as Victor felt her heart stop. He cried, a raw, powerful sound that felt like it could break everything. He rocked her, whispered her name again and again. He refused to accept what his heart knew. His tears soaked her hair as he kissed her forehead, lips, hands, desperate to remember every detail of her face. Somewhere, sirens and footsteps came, but nothing mattered. Victor's world had ended. Matt's revenge was complete, not just because Nikki was gone, but because Victor would live with the pain of her absence, every empty morning, every silent night, every echo of her laughter in their home. As Victor lifted his head, his eyes dark and determined, a vow formed in the ashes of his grief. Nikki's death wouldn't be in vain. Matt would learn that revenge always has a cost, and Victor would make sure it was a price he would never forget. He whispered his last goodbye, knowing the woman who had loved him deepest was gone forever. The night didn't end with Nikki's last breath. It started a new kind of darkness that wrapped around Victor Newman like a tight, suffocating blanket. He stayed seated on the cold floor, holding Nikki in his arms long after the room filled with voices, flashing lights and stunned faces. Letting go felt like a second death he wasn't ready to face. Even when gentle hands touched his shoulders and people urged him to release her, Victor couldn't move. His body was stiff with shock, his mind replaying the last moments over and over, searching for something he could have said or done differently, something he could have changed to love her more. When he was finally forced to let go, the emptiness hit him so hard it nearly made him fall. The weight of her absence was heavier than her body had ever been. Nikki was carried away, wrapped in white, reduced to a shape that no longer breathed, no longer spoke, no longer argued or laughed at his stubbornness. Victor watched until she disappeared from sight, standing alone as a hollow, broken man in a world that suddenly felt wrong, unbalanced, cruel and unforgiving. Whispers filled the air, names spoken in hushed tones, Matt's name among them like poison. Victor's grief twisted into something sharper, colder, and more dangerous. Grief wasn't the end for a man like Victor Newman. It was the start of something bigger. As the night passed and the house emptied, silence crept in, echoing with memories of Nikki's presence. Her perfume still lingered in the air, her favorite chair untouched, her glass still sitting where she had left it. Victor wandered the rooms like a ghost, his fingers brushing familiar objects, each one like a knife to the heart, whispering her name. When dawn finally came, it didn't bring comfort, just the cruel reminder that the world kept moving while his had stopped. News of Nikki's death spread quickly, condolences and flowers arriving in waves, faces filled with pity and shock, but none of it reached the wall Victor had built around himself. Inside that wall, only two things existed: love and revenge. Standing by the window, staring at a city he no longer cared about, Victor made a silent promise within his soul that Matt would pay for what he had done. Not quickly, not mercifully, but completely, in a way that would take everything Matt valued, just as Nikki had been taken from him. Meanwhile, Matt sat alone far away, the victory he had hoped for tasting bitter on his tongue. Revenge hadn't brought the peace he expected, only a haunting image of Nikki's final moments. Her eyes hadn't been filled with fear but with love for Victor, a love that mocked Matt's hatred and made him question, for just a moment, whether he had crossed a line from which there was no return. But that doubt hardened into defiance as he reminded himself of years of rage, and the belief that Victor deserved to suffer. And back at Newman Ranch, preparations began for a funeral that felt unreal, a farewell Victor never wanted to plan. Every detail reminded him that Nikki was truly gone. When Victor finally stood before her casket, dressed in black, his face hard as stone, he didn't cry, because his tears had already been spent. Instead, he placed a single hand on the polished wood and whispered a vow of love and vengeance, promising Nikki that he would finish what Matt had started, that he would protect their family, that her name would never be forgotten. As mourners gathered, each carrying their own grief, Victor stood unmoved, a man changed by loss. Deep inside, beneath the sorrow and rage, a dangerous clarity formed. Victor Newman had lost the woman he loved more than anything, and there was nothing left to fear. That truth made him more powerful than ever. As the chapter of Nikki's life closed and the next chapter of this brutal story began, it was fueled by grief, guilt, and a revenge that would ripple through every life Matt touched. Proving that even in death, Nikki Newman would remain the center of Victor's world, the reason he would fight, destroy, and ultimately redefine what justice meant, in a war that was only just beginning. The day of Nikki Newman's funeral dawned beneath a sky so gray it felt like even the heavens were in mourning, and Victor stood alone in the master bedroom staring at the black suit laid out before him, his reflection in the mirror barely recognizable, the powerful titan reduced to a hollow shell whose eyes carried the weight of a lifetime now fractured by one irreversible moment. And as he dressed with mechanical precision, every movement reminded him of Nikki's absence. No teasing comment about his tie, no gentle hand smoothing his collar, no shared silence filled with understanding. And when he finally descended the stairs, the house felt cavernous, echoing with footsteps that should have been accompanied by hers, and outside the world gathered to say goodbye to a woman who had been a legend in her own right, friends and enemies alike united by grief, their whispers rippling through the air like a low, constant hum. But Victor heard none of it, his focus locked on the polished casket at the front, the final barrier between him and the woman he loved. And as he took his seat, memories assaulted him without mercy. Nikki standing defiantly at his side when the world doubted her. Nikki holding his face and demanding honesty when he tried to push her away. Nikki forgiving him when forgiveness seemed impossible. And when the service began, words were spoken about strength, resilience, and love, but Victor felt each sentence land like a blade, because no words could capture what Nikki had meant to him. And when it was his turn to speak, the room held its breath as he stood, his hands gripping the podium for support, his voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside him. And he spoke of love that survived betrayal, of a woman who fought her demons and never stopped believing in redemption, of a partnership that defined his life. And as he finished, his composure finally cracked, a single tear sliding down his cheek as he whispered goodbye. And in that moment, the man Victor Newman had been before Nikki's death ceased to exist entirely, replaced by something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous, because grief had stripped away his last illusion of mercy. And as the casket was lowered into the ground, Victor felt a finality settle over him that hardened his resolve. And while others clung to one another in shared sorrow, Victor stood alone, already planning his next move, because Matt's revenge might have been complete in taking Nikki's life, but Victor's response would redefine the meaning of consequence. And as days turned into nights and nights into sleepless hours, Victor withdrew from the world, his presence at Newman Enterprises growing increasingly ominous, his decisions ruthless, his patience non-existent, as though every ounce of restraint he once possessed had been buried alongside Nikki, and whispers began to circulate that Victor Newman was back in a way no one had seen before, more focused, more relentless, and more unforgiving than ever. And at the center of it all was Matt, whose fleeting satisfaction quickly curdled into paranoia as Victor's influence closed in around him like a tightening vice, allies disappearing, accounts frozen, opportunities vanishing overnight, each loss a reminder that Victor Newman never forgot and never forgave. And yet even as Matt watched his world crumble, he clung to the belief that he had won the ultimate victory, that no amount of financial ruin could compare to the pain he had inflicted. But he underestimated the depth of Victor's grief, because Victor was no longer fighting for power or pride. He was fighting for Nikki's memory, and that made him unstoppable. And in the quiet moments, alone in the empty house, Victor would find himself standing in doorways, expecting to see Nikki sitting there, smiling at him, and the pain of those moments nearly drove him to his knees. But instead of breaking him, the pain fueled him, sharpened his focus, and when news finally reached him that Matt had been located, hiding behind layers of protection and arrogance, Victor felt a grim calm settle over him, because the hunt was nearing its end, and as he prepared to confront the man who had taken everything from him, Victor visited Nikki's grave one last time, standing before it in silence as the wind whispered through the trees, and he spoke to her then, not with rage but with love, promising her that he would finish this, that he would make sure her death was not the final chapter of their story. And as he turned away, his path was set, leading toward a confrontation that would not be loud or explosive but devastating in its precision, because Victor Newman understood better than anyone that the most painful ends were not sudden. They were slow, deliberate, and inescapable. And as Matt waited in the shadows, unaware of just how close Victor was, the weight of Nikki's loss hung over everything, a silent force guiding Victor's hand, shaping his choices, and ensuring that when the final reckoning came, it would echo with the truth that love, once taken, could become the most powerful weapon of all, and that Nikki Newman, even in death, would be the reason Victor Newman would rise, destroy, and ultimately redefine himself in a world forever changed by her absence. The confrontation came not with sirens or shouting but with a quiet inevitability that felt far more terrifying. As Victor Newman stood in the shadows of a dimly lit room watching Matt pace like a trapped animal, the weight of his own choices finally pressing down on him, and when Victor stepped forward, his presence alone silenced the air, his voice calm, controlled, and deadly in its restraint as he spoke Nikki's name, forcing Matt to face the reality of what he had done. And Matt lashed out, with bitter words about revenge and justice, claiming victory because Nikki was gone, because Victor would live the rest of his life in pain. But Victor did not flinch, did not raise his voice, because grief had burned away his need for theatrics, leaving behind a man who understood that true punishment was not death but exposure, isolation, and the slow collapse of everything Matt believed he controlled. And Victor revealed piece by piece how Matt's allies had turned, how his money was gone, how his escape routes had closed, how every move he made was already anticipated. And with each revelation Matt's confidence crumbled, panic replacing arrogance as he realized the depth of Victor's reach. And yet Victor told him this was not revenge, not in the way Matt understood it, because Nikki had never believed in cruelty for its own sake, and Victor would honor her by making Matt live with the consequences of his hatred, live with the knowledge that his so-called victory had left him empty, alone, and powerless. And as security closed in and Matt was led away, screaming that Victor had lost everything, Victor responded with a quiet truth that cut deeper than any threat, telling Matt that love was never a weakness, that Nikki's love had shaped him, strengthened him, and would outlive both of them. And when the room finally emptied, Victor stood alone again, the familiar silence returning. But this time it felt different, heavier yet resolute. And later, standing once more at Nikki's grave under a darkening sky, Victor placed his hand against the cool stone and spoke softly, telling her it was over, that justice, her kind of justice, had been done, and though the pain of her absence would never fade, neither would her presence in his life, because she lived on in every choice he made from that moment forward. And as Victor turned away and walked back toward a future he never wanted but would now face alone, he carried with him the truth that love did not end with death, that Nikki Newman had not truly been taken from him, and that even in the deepest loss, she remained his strength, his conscience, and the reason he would continue to stand unbroken in a world forever changed by her final painful goodbye.